Hello and welcome back to the Southern Bible Thumper channel. I'm Cam, and for this upload, we will be reading and discussing Exodus chapter 8. And the Lord spake unto Moses, Go unto Pharaoh, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord, Let my people go, that they may serve me. And if thou refuse to let them go, behold, I will smite all thy borders with frogs, and the rivers shall bring forth frogs abundantly. And the river shall bring forth frogs abundantly, which shall go up and come into thine house, and into thy bedchamber, and upon thy bed, and into the house of the servants, and upon thy people, and into thine ovens, and into thy kneading troughs. And the frog shall come up both on thee, and upon thy people, and upon all thy servants. And the Lord spake unto Moses, Say unto Aaron, Stretch forth thine hand with thy rod over the streams, over the rivers, and over the ponds, and cause frogs to come up upon the land of Egypt. And Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. And the magicians did so with their enchantments, and brought up frogs upon the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron, and said, Entreat the Lord, that he may take away the frogs from me, and from my people, and I will let the people go, that they may do sacrifice unto the Lord. And Moses said unto Pharaoh, Glory over me, when shall I entreat for thee, and for thy servants, and for thy people, to destroy the frogs from thee and thy houses, that they may remain in the river only? And he said, Tomorrow. And he said, Be it according to thy word, that thou mayest know that there is none like unto the Lord our God. And the frogs shall depart from thee, and from thy houses, and from thy servants, and from thy people. They shall remain in the river only. And Moses and Aaron went out from Pharaoh, and Moses cried unto the Lord because of the frogs which he had brought against Pharaoh. And the Lord did according to the word of Moses, and the frogs died out of the houses, out of the village, and out of the fields, and they gathered them together upon heaps, and the land stank. But when Pharaoh saw that there was respite, he hardened his heart, and hearkened not unto them as the Lord had said. And the Lord said unto Moses, Say unto Aaron, Stretch out thy rod, and smite the dust of the land, that it may become lice throughout all the land of Egypt. And they did so. For Aaron stretched out his hand with his rod, and smote the dust of the earth, and it became lice in man and in beast. All the dust of the land became lice throughout all the land of Egypt. And the magicians did so with their enchantments to bring forth lice, but they could not. So there were lice upon man and upon beasts. Then the magicians said unto Pharaoh, This is the finger of God. And Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he hearkened not unto them as the Lord had said. And the Lord said unto Moses, Rise up early in the morning, and stand before Pharaoh. Lo, he cometh forth to the water, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord, Let my people go, that they may serve me. Else, if thou wilt not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms of flies upon thee, and upon thy servants, and upon thy people, and into thy houses, and the houses of the Egyptians shall be full of swarms of flies, and also the ground whereon they are. And I will sever in that day the land of Goshen, in which my people dwell, that no swarms of flies shall be there, to the end thou mayest know that I am the Lord in the midst of the earth. And I will put a division between my people and thy people. Tomorrow shall this sign be. And the Lord did so. And there came a grievous swarm of flies into the house of Pharaoh, and into his servants' houses, and into all the land of Egypt. The land was corrupted by reason of the swarm of flies. And Pharaoh called Moses and for Aaron, and said, Go ye sacrifice to your God in the land. And Moses said, It is not meet so to do. For we shall sacrifice the abomination of the Egyptians to the Lord our God. Lo, shall we sacrifice the abomination of the Egyptians before their eyes, and will they not stone us? We will go 3 days' journey into the wilderness, and sacrifice to the Lord our God, as he shall command us. And Pharaoh said, I will let you go, that ye may sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness. Only ye shall not go very far away. Entreat for me. And Moses said, Behold, I go out from thee, and I will entreat the Lord, that the swarms of flies may depart from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people tomorrow. But let not Pharaoh deal deceitfully any more, and not letting the people go to sacrifice to the Lord. And Moses went out from Pharaoh and entreated the Lord. And the Lord did according to the word of Moses, and he removed the swarms of flies from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people. There remained not one. And Pharaoh hardened his heart at this time also, neither would he let the people go. Summarizing Exodus chapter 8, the end of chapter 7, verse 25, the rivers had been blood for 7 days. There are no further status updates on if it returned, when it returned, if during this chapter 8 was it still blood. Uh, Chapter just ends like that. So, chapter 8, verse 1, God tells Aaron and Moses to tell Pharaoh that if you don't let the Israelites go, that frogs will plague the land. Then Aaron stretched his arm over the land to produce frogs, which covered the land. Pharaoh's magicians produced similar results. In chapter 8, verse 8, Pharaoh seemingly gives in. He asked Aaron and Moses to appeal to the Lord the next day and to please take away the frogs. The frogs died, and the land stank as the frogs were collected. Then Pharaoh hardened his heart. God instructed Aaron to smite the dust, which turned it to lice and affected humans and animals. In verse 18, Pharaoh's magicians could not replicate this occurrence and told Pharaoh that this plague really was from God. God told Moses and Aaron to tell Pharaoh to let the Hebrews go, or that swarms of flies will descend upon the land. No flies will swarm on Goshen, where the Hebrews were dwelling. Pharaoh told Aaron and Moses that they could go, but not that far, if they asked God to take the flies away. They respond that God required them to obey God completely by traveling the 3 days away. Pharaoh agrees. Moses, prays to God and asked God to take the flies away. So he did. And then Pharaoh hardened his heart, lied, and didn't let the people go. Highlights of chapter 8. God tells Moses to talk to Pharaoh to warn him of the plague of frogs. And then in verse 5, God tells Aaron to stretch out his arms to manifest the plague. And just wanted to note that the way that this was written is a little bit different than how some of the other plagues or some of the other warnings to Pharaoh was written. In chapter 7, verse 20, God instructed them to warn Pharaoh before the plague, and then they did as they were commanded. In chapter 7, verse 2, they warned Pharaoh to perform the snake miracle, and then in verse 10, they did as God commanded. Chapter 5, verse 1, they told Pharaoh to let the Hebrews go, or Egypt might be stricken with pestilence. And then after the frogs, and the frogs came, then Pharaoh called Aaron and Moses, the lice, the flies. It was just noted a bit differently when it got down to the frogs, the lice, and the flies. Instead of saying they did as God commanded, it was noted a little bit differently, written differently. The second highlight, Joseph and his family, or the Hebrews or the Israelites, they lived in Goshen in Genesis chapter 50, verse 8. In Genesis chapter 47, verse 27, Israel lived in the country Goshen. In Genesis chapter 47, verse 4 through 6, Pharaoh at that time told Jacob and his family, Jacob and Joseph, that his family, Joseph, Joseph and Jacob, because they're both, that Joseph is Jacob's son, they were told by Pharaoh directly that they were welcome to dwell in Goshen, which is in Egypt. Chapter 47, Genesis chapter 7, verse 4 through 6. Then in Exodus chapter 1, verse 1 through 7, the children of Israel grew exceedingly. There's no mention of plagues avoiding the Hebrews specifically until chapter 8, verse 22 with the flies. But just wanted to bring those verses up to highlight that Goshen were where the Hebrews, the Israelites, the children of Israel were dwelling. The next highlight: flies and frogs are what made Pharaoh agree the first time, even though he revoked his decision. Irritation is a tool that sometimes motivates people to do things, but uh, to a point, because then he still said no. But that irritation, it did make him finally say, "Hey, Moses, please, let's do something about this." But uh, also want to highlight that the lice did not cause Pharaoh to want to agree to God's request. It was the frogs and the flies, but the lice is able to deal with it a bit better. The lice could not be replicated by the magicians, and only then did they acknowledge the power of God in chapter 8, verse 19. When the plague of flies came, the magicians were not noted as even attempting to recreate that plague. So even these plagues are even persuading some of the servants in Pharaoh's household. Well, that is the summary of Exodus chapter 8, and the next upload will be Exodus chapter 9. Thank you for watching.